He was a millionaire who ruled the city with cold arrogance. She was a young waitress, working night after night to keep her brother alive. In front of a hushed crowd, he slammed the bill shut, tossed down a single dollar, and spat out one word that shattered her: worthless. The room froze. Her dignity collapsed under the weight of his cruelty. But what no one expected was that this moment of humiliation would ignite something far greater, and her next words would leave the entire restaurant in shock. The dining room at the Aurelia gleamed like a jewel box under chandeliers cut sharp as ice. The air smelled of truffle oil, seared wagyu, and the floral bite of expensive perfume. For Emily Carter, the scent meant survival. Every shift at this exclusive midtown restaurant paid a little more toward Ethan's treatment and a little more toward her final year at NYU Law. She wore the black uniform that demanded invisibility and carried herself with a calm she had learned to manufacture. Her tray was steady. Her smile was precise. Her mind was calculating numbers that refused to add up. That morning a letter had arrived from St. Gabriel Medical Center. It was courteous and merciless. Ethan's pulmonologist recommended a new inhaled antibiotic with stronger outcomes, but the insurance denial stood. The first month would cost $2,800. The number had sat on Emily's tongue all day like a shard of glass. She could not swallow it. She dared not spit it out. She ran a fingertip along the polished rim of a crystal glass and checked her section. For tops at tables 2 and 4 were coasting toward dessert. Table 7, the corner banquette with a view that made even locals feel like tourists, was open. The host stand buzzed. A whisper moved from the door to the bar and then across the floor like wind through reeds. Victor Hale had arrived. Even if you did not know his name, you felt the atmosphere tilt. Tall. Severe. A suit the color of thunderheads that fit like certainty. He did not walk so much as occupy space. 2 younger men followed him, all eager nods and curated laughter. Brandon wore a navy tie that tried too hard. Cole had a watch the size of a compass. Together they moved with the assurance of people accustomed to having doors open before they reached them. Martin Delgado, the general manager, intercepted them with a bow that was almost a fold. "Mr. Hale, welcome back. Table 7 is prepared." "We are honored, sir." Martin's voice smoothed into its most expensive register. He gestured toward Emily's section. A fine tremor started in Emily's hands and stopped because she would not allow it to continue. She had served Victor Hale once, months ago. He had sent back a bottle of wine after the sommelier called it flawless. He had required his ice on the side and counted the cubes after the glass touched the table. He had tipped as if extracting a splinter, then left without looking at the person who placed the food he praised. Nina Lopez brushed past Emily with a tray of empty flutes and murmured without moving her lips. "Deep breath. You have this. Think of Ethan." Emily let the words pass over her like cool air. She set 3 menus beneath her arm, lifted a water service she had prepared for just this moment, and walked. Up close Victor Hale was not handsome. He was a blade. His expression suggested he had seen enough of the world to be perpetually unimpressed. Brandon and Cole took the banquette, faces turned toward Hale like sunflowers. Martin performed the introductions as if announcing dignitaries. Emily waited, still as a drawn bow. "Good evening, gentlemen," Emily said. "My name is Emily, and I will be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with water? We have still, sparkling, and chilled mineral." "Just water," Victor said, eyes on his phone. "Still. No lemon. Ice on the side. 3 cubes. Do not hover." "Yes, sir." Emily poured with a steady hand, set the ice bowl precisely at 12 o'clock, and placed the bottle at a perfect angle of service. She let silence do the work a smile could not. They ordered like men auditioning for power. Oysters to begin. Wagyu New York strip. The truffle risotto. 2 bottles of Grand Cru. Victor's voice sliced through the restaurant's soft murmur. He corrected the sommelier's pronunciation without glancing up. He sent back the first bottle with a murmur about a phantom flaw. He changed his steak temperature mid-sentence and then criticized the kitchen for following the original instruction. Brandon laughed when Victor laughed. Cole laughed a beat later. Emily moved through the demands as if the floor were a chessboard. Glassware aligned. Silverware replaced. Course timings adjusted with a touch to the expediter's shoulder and a nod to the line. She was invisible when the table wished her to be and present at the exact second presence was required. She refused to think about the number that thrummed behind her ribs. 2,800. She thought about Ethan chasing a soccer ball with an inhaler tucked into a coach's pocket. She thought about the cost of air. By the time the chocolate tart landed with its mirror glaze unmarred, the dining room had settled around a rhythm that Emily recognized. The worst of the storm had passed. She could see the bill in her head before it printed. $2,478.50. At 20%, the tip would erase the dread that had stalked her since morning. At 20%, Ethan could breathe a little easier. She printed the check and placed it in the leather folio. The leather felt heavier than it should. She set it on the table with a nod and withdrew one measured pace. Brandon kept talking. Cole scrolled through emails. Victor did not reach for the folio. He let it sit between the espresso cups like a challenge. 1 minute. 3. 5. Emily stood at the edge of the table and became air. At last Victor opened the folio and looked down, then up, and finally at Emily. His eyes were gray, the color of a sky that refused to let the light through. A slow, almost amused curl touched his mouth. He reached into his wallet. He did not take out a card. He placed one crisp dollar on the tray and closed the folio with a quiet tap that sounded like a verdict. Emily felt the room change temperature by a single degree. Victor rose. Brandon scraped at his seat. Cole followed with a nervous laugh that died quickly. Victor's gaze passed through Emily as if she were made of smoke. The dollar lay on the leather like a white flag stained with irony. Emily drew a breath that tasted of truffle and frost and something metallic. She did not move. The dollar bill gleamed under the chandelier, its green edges bright against the dark leather check holder. For Emily Carter, the single note was louder than a shout. It rang inside her skull, echoing over and over until it became a verdict. She had expected condescension, but not annihilation. Her lips parted, just enough for a whisper to escape. "Sir, is everything all right with the bill?" Victor Hale turned slowly, his posture casual, his face carved into disdain. The silence of the restaurant amplified his every movement. Patrons leaned back in their chairs. Forks hovered above plates. Conversations fell away until only the hush of anticipation remained. "The bill is an invoice for services rendered," Victor said, his voice pitched low but carrying across the room. "It implies that a service was provided." He flicked his hand toward Emily, as if dismissing smoke. "What I received tonight was not service. It was a series of barely competent actions by someone who adds no value whatsoever." Brandon smirked. Cole gave a weak chuckle, but it faltered quickly. Victor's voice rose, filling the space. "I don't pay for worthless assets. And she," he declared, turning his full attention on Emily, "is worthless." The word sliced through the dining room like glass shattering on marble. Worthless. Emily's throat seized. Heat flared along her neck and across her face. For a split second she forgot how to breathe. The weight of dozens of eyes pressed against her skin. Some pitied. Some were eager for the spectacle. Some looked away, relieved it was not them in her place. The leather folio remained open. The $1 bill stared back at her like a cruel joke. Martin Delgado, the manager, appeared in a rush of nervous energy. "Mr. Hale, please," he said, his smile trembling. "Surely there's been a misunderstanding." If there's any problem at all, we will resolve it immediately. Victor paused, turning to face Martin with an air of exaggerated patience. The problem, Martin, is that I was promised excellence and instead endured mediocrity. The wine was mishandled. The food lacked spirit. And the service, well, the service was what you see before you now. He gestured at Emily as though she were an object to be catalogued. I will not subsidize incompetence. The dollar is for the water, which, miraculously, she managed not to spill. Consider it a lesson in value. Martin nodded frantically, his authority dissolving into obedience. Of course, Mr. Hale. Please, allow the house to cover tonight's meal. There will be no charge at all. Emily's heart stuttered. The entire bill, nearly $2,500, erased in a moment, not because it was fair, but because Martin was terrified of losing Hale's favor. Her dignity was cheaper than Hale's approval. Victor inclined his head once, satisfied. A wise decision. He cast one final look at Emily, cold and dismissive. That, Martin, is how you handle a non-performing asset. He turned on his heel, and Brandon and Cole scrambled to follow. The door opened, and the night air spilled in. Then he was gone. The restaurant exhaled. Sound returned, but distorted, hushed. Conversations resumed in broken fragments. Eyes darted toward Emily, then away. Martin rounded on her, his expression hard now that Hale was no longer watching. What did you do? He hissed. Emily flinched. Nothing. I treated him like any other guest. He was difficult from the start. You don't understand, Martin snapped. That man sits on the board of the group that owns this restaurant. One word from him could ruin us. You were supposed to be perfect. You were supposed to be invisible. Instead, you cost us $2,500. He crushed the receipt in his fist and leaned closer. This is coming out of your pay. Emily's chest tightened. She knew it was an empty threat, illegal, even, but the venom in his tone made the words sting. Go to the back. Chloe can take your tables. I don't want to see your face out here again tonight. He stormed away. The tray remained in front of her, the single dollar still resting like a brand on her skin. Her eyes burned. Her throat ached. But she refused to let tears fall in front of the watching crowd. She gathered the folio and the dollar with trembling fingers and turned toward the staff corridor. Each step felt like walking underwater, heavy and slow. The chatter of the restaurant faded behind her. She pushed through the swinging door into the fluorescent-lit staff hallway. The brightness was merciless. The walls buzzed with electricity. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen was sharp and raw. She slipped into the break room and sank onto a hard plastic chair. The single dollar slid from her hand and landed on the table, too bright, too sharp. She stared at it until the edges blurred. Worthless. The word wrapped around her chest like iron bands. She thought of Ethan in his hospital bed, smiling through the pain. She thought of her mother, exhausted, working extra shifts. She thought of her own life, stretched thin between law classes and endless hours at Aurelia. She thought of all she carried, tuition, rent, medicine, and how one man's voice had reduced it to nothing. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A message from her mother lit the screen. Hospital called. New treatment available. Better results. Insurance won't cover. First month $2,800. Emily pressed the phone to her chest. Her body shook with silent sobs. The number mocked her. 2,800. A mountain she could not climb. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, she believed Victor Hale. Maybe she was worthless. Maybe everything she had fought for, every long night, every lecture, every sacrifice, meant nothing. The thought hollowed her out. The tears she had held back slipped free, streaking her cheeks in silence. The break room buzzed with fluorescent light, harsh and unkind. Emily Carter sat slumped on a plastic chair, staring at the single dollar on the table as though it were a verdict branded into her soul. Her hands trembled in her lap, her chest tight from holding back sobs. Worthless. The word echoed again and again, louder than the clatter of dishes outside the door. Other staff filtered in and out, their laughter too bright, their conversations too distant, as though happening on another planet. Chloe Nguyen, her closest friend on the floor, entered carrying a chipped glass of water. She took one look at Emily and slid into the seat beside her without a word. She pressed the glass into Emily's hands. "Drink," Chloe said softly. Emily obeyed, though the water tasted like ash. Her throat burned from swallowing grief. "Henderson's a coward," Chloe muttered, her voice low and edged with fury. "And Victor Hale, he's a monster. None of this is on you. Do you hear me? None of it." Emily shook her head slowly. "He made me feel so small," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Like I was nothing. Like I could disappear and the world would be lighter without me." Chloe reached over and squeezed her hand. "No, Liv. He's the small one. Men like that, they only have money. That's all. They use it to pretend they're powerful. But inside? They're empty." Emily wanted to believe her, but the wound was raw. She clutched the dollar tighter, as though its sharp edges could cut away the shame. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her mother. "Doctor says we should start as soon as possible. Emily, we can't wait." She closed her eyes. The hospital's demand sat heavy inside her chest. $2,800. Tonight's tip would have carried her halfway there. Now she had a single dollar and a debt she couldn't outrun. For a long moment despair flooded her veins, cold and choking. Maybe Hale was right. Maybe she was fighting a losing battle, serving entitled men who could crush her dignity with a flick of their wrist, struggling toward a future that kept receding like the horizon. She leaned her forehead against the cold locker beside her and let the tears fall freely. She cried for Ethan, whose lungs betrayed him. She cried for her mother, whose back ached from double shifts. She cried for herself, exhausted from carrying too much weight. Her breath came ragged. The fluorescent hum pressed into her skull. She felt caged, suffocated, like a bird trapped beneath glass. And then, something shifted. It was not gentle. It was not gradual. Something inside her snapped. Her tears stopped as suddenly as they had begun. Her breath steadied. Her heart still hurt, but it beat with a new rhythm, cold and deliberate. She sat upright, the dollar still clutched in her hand. She stared at it, no longer as a symbol of humiliation, but as evidence. A weapon. Her mind, trained by years of law school, began to fire. Contracts. Liability. Defamation. Market value. Words Hale had flung like daggers now spun in her head as tools, sharp and precise. He had spoken the language of business. She knew that language better than he realized. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. He thought he'd humiliated a waitress. He had no idea he'd just challenged a law student who lived and breathed the very doctrines he misused. Chloe watched her, startled by the sudden change in her posture. "Emily, what are you thinking?" Emily stood, slipping the dollar into her apron pocket like evidence sealed in a file. "I'm thinking he made a mistake," she said quietly. Her voice carried a new weight. The slump of defeat was gone. Her shoulders straightened. Her chin lifted. "He wanted to teach me a lesson in value. Fine. I'll give him one in the law." Chloe's eyes widened. "Henderson told you to stay back here. Please, Liv, don't. Just go home. Forget this night." Emily shook her head, steady and resolved. "I won't forget. He didn't just refuse to pay a tip. He defamed me in front of witnesses. He breached the implied covenant of fair dealing. He tried to strip away my worth with a single word. She pushed away from the table and smoothed her apron with deliberate precision. I am not worthless, Chloe. And I will not let him walk away believing I am. Without waiting for a reply, Emily strode toward the door. The fluorescent lights fell behind her. The dull chatter of the break room faded. Ahead, the muted glow of the dining room beckoned. She pushed the door open and stepped back into the world that had watched her humiliation. But this time, she was no longer the trembling waitress. She was Emily Carter, top 10% at NYU Law, a woman with fire in her chest and words sharp enough to cut stone. And she was going to use them. The dining room of the Aurelia was alive again with clinking glasses and murmured conversations, yet the tension from earlier still clung to the air like smoke. Emily Carter walked through the double doors with a new stride. The waitress who had carried shame into the break room was gone. What returned was a woman who looked and moved like an advocate entering a courtroom. Heads turned. Patrons remembered the insult, the single dollar, the humiliation. Now, they watched with hushed curiosity. Emily didn't glance at them. Her eyes locked on Victor Hale. He was standing near the entrance with Brandon and Cole, waiting for the valet to bring around a sleek black Bentley. Martin Delgado hovered beside them, wringing his hands and offering sycophantic assurances. Mr. Hale, Emily's voice rang out, clear and strong. The group turned. Brandon smirked, nudging Cole. Martin paled. Emily stepped forward, her chin high, her words measured. I believe we have unfinished business. Victor arched an eyebrow, amused. Have you come to beg for the tip you don't deserve? Martin rushed forward, whispering harshly. Emily, back to the kitchen. That's an order. She ignored him. Her focus was razor sharp, her voice calm. No, sir. I've come to discuss the terms of our transaction. The word hung in the air like a spark. A few patrons paused mid-step, turning to watch. Victor crossed his arms, a condescending smirk tugging at his lips. This should be entertaining. Enlighten me. Emily nodded slightly, as though preparing to present evidence. You claimed my service was worthless, that I provided no value. You refused to pay, using the language of contracts and markets. So let's continue on those terms. A murmur rippled through the crowd. She took another step closer. The basis of any restaurant exchange is an implied contract. You order food. We provide service. You pay. By consuming the meal in full, you accepted the terms. To refuse payment on grounds of incompetence, the service must cause material harm. Did I spill on you? Did I deliver the wrong order? Did I insult you? Victor's sneer deepened. Your incompetence was insult enough. That, Emily countered, is a subjective opinion. Not a breach. Legally, your argument is baseless. You consumed the product in its entirety, therefore binding yourself to the contract. The onlookers grew silent. Emily's voice carried like a practiced litigator. And then, she said, her tone sharpening, you made a public statement. Not that my service was poor, but that I am worthless. That is not critique. That is slander. Spoken in front of witnesses, intended to destroy my professional standing. That, Mr. Hale, is unlawful. Victor blinked, his smirk faltering for the first time. Emily did not let the silence linger. You wanted to measure worth. Let us calculate. I am a student at NYU Law, top 10% of my class. My tuition alone is an investment of $315,000. Upon graduation, my projected market value, yes, market value, is over $225,000 a year at a top firm. She let the words hang, her gaze unflinching. And you assessed my worth at $1. The crowd shifted, whispers sharp as sparks. Brandon's smirk slipped. Cole's hands fidgeted. Emily pressed on, her words now cutting like steel. Tonight, you didn't just refuse to pay a tip. You attempted a hostile takeover of my dignity. But you underestimated your opponent. Her eyes locked on his. I am not worthless. I am an investment. And the service you received tonight came from someone whose billable rate will soon be $800 an hour. So perhaps, Mr. Hale, you owe me not $1, but $1,600, for the legal education I've just provided. The silence that followed was electric. The valet stood frozen, keys dangling from his hand. Diners at nearby tables leaned forward, holding their breath. Victor's face drained of color. His jaw worked, but no words came. For the first time that night, he looked uncertain. Emily's voice softened, but carried a final blow. A lesson was taught here tonight. But you, sir, have mistaken the student for the teacher. She stepped back, letting the words settle like thunder. The restaurant was silent, a theater at the edge of applause. Victor Hale stood motionless, stripped of his arrogance, staring at the woman he had tried to crush. And Emily Carter stood tall, unshaken, as the room waited for his reply. For a long moment, no one breathed. The hum of the Bentley's engine outside seemed like the only sound in the universe. Victor Hale stood frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with humiliation. Brandon and Cole shifted uneasily, their earlier arrogance draining into discomfort. And then a voice, calm and commanding, cut through the silence. She is absolutely correct. Every head turned toward the corner of the restaurant, where a silver-haired man in a navy suit stepped forward. His presence was quiet but undeniable, the kind of authority that did not need to announce itself. His wire-rimmed glasses glinted in the soft light, and his stride carried the weight of experience. Victor's eyes narrowed. Robert, he muttered, his voice betraying recognition. Robert Stanton, senior partner at Stanton & Cole, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country, approached with deliberate ease. He paused beside Emily, his gaze flicking briefly to her before returning to Victor. I was enjoying dinner until your theatrics disrupted the room, Stanton said, his tone casual yet sharp. I watched everything from over there by the window. And this young woman, he nodded toward Emily, just gave you a flawless demonstration of contract law and defamation principles. A ripple of surprise moved through the diners. Victor scoffed. This is ridiculous. Are we really entertaining the idea that a waitress has the authority to lecture me? Stanton's eyes hardened. You mistake authority for truth. And the truth, Silas, is that your actions tonight were reckless. Publicly declaring a professional worthless in front of dozens of witnesses. That is textbook slander per se. Add in the financial harm, which she can prove with medical bills she's struggling to cover, and she has a compelling case against you. Cole's face blanched. Brandon avoided eye contact altogether. Stanton took another step closer, his voice low and dangerous. But what interests me most, Victor, is the hypocrisy. You speak of worthless assets, yet you seem to forget your own past. Victor stiffened. His jaw flexed. Don't. Oh, I will, Stanton replied smoothly. 25 years ago, there was a young man, broke and desperate, with little more than arrogance and a dream. Every investor turned him down. He was down to his last dollar. Stanton's gaze bore into Victor's. And then someone took a chance on him. Jonathan Cole, my late partner. Against all advice, Jonathan invested $50,000 in that arrogant kid with holes in his shoes. That boy's name? Victor Hale. Gasps rippled through the room. Brandon and Cole froze, their mouths slightly open. Victor's mask cracked, shame flickering across his features. Stanton's voice sharpened. Jonathan saw value in you when no one else did. He believed worth was not measured by circumstance but by character. And tonight, you proved you learned nothing from his generosity. Victor's eyes fell, his smirk gone, his power dissolved. For the first time, he looked less like a titan and more like a man exposed. Stanton turned back to Emily, his expression softening. "You handled yourself brilliantly, Miss Carter," she said quietly, still steady. "Emily Carter." He nodded approvingly. "Emily Carter. Remember that name, ladies and gentlemen. Because tonight she proved what true value looks like: courage, integrity, and knowledge." The room erupted in murmurs. Some nodded in agreement. Others whispered Emily's name. Martin Delgado scurried forward, his face pale. "Mr. Stanton, please, this was all a misunderstanding." Stanton cut him off with a single raised hand. "Enough, Martin. I'll be informing your parent company about how you let one of your staff be humiliated without defense. Consider your future here, uncertain." Martin's knees seemed to buckle. Stanton turned to Emily once more, his voice warm now. "My firm runs a competitive associate program. I believe you would be a perfect fit. Call my office tomorrow. The position is yours, if you want it." The room went silent again, but this silence was different, charged, hopeful. Emily's heart thundered. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, sir." Robert Stanton smiled. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You earned it." Victor Hale, stripped and silent, shoved past Brandon and Cole, muttering for his driver. The Bentley roared, carrying him into the night, but his empire, his image, was already cracking. And Emily Carter stood beneath the golden chandeliers, no longer invisible, but unforgettable. The doors of the Aurelia swung shut behind Victor Hale, but the echo of his downfall lingered in the air. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, like a wave breaking, the dining room erupted, not in mockery, but in applause. It began with a scattering of claps from the back, hesitant yet insistent. Then another table joined, and another, until the entire restaurant was on its feet, hands striking together in a rhythm of solidarity. For the first time that night, the sound did not wound Emily Carter. It lifted her. Her cheeks flushed with color, but it was not the sting of shame. It was pride, warm and steady. She glanced at Chloe, who had slipped to the front of the crowd, her eyes shining with tears and fierce joy. Robert Stanton remained at her side, nodding once with quiet approval before stepping back into the shadows of influence. His presence was enough. His words had given her both validation and power. Brandon and Cole stood awkwardly at the entrance, left behind by their disgraced benefactor. Their bravado had evaporated, leaving only pale faces and darting eyes. Cole fumbled for his wallet, pulling out a platinum card with trembling fingers. "We'll settle the bill," he said quickly, thrusting the card toward Emily. "And the tip, of course." Emily took it without a word, her fingers steady. She walked to the register and processed the payment. A moment later she returned, handing the receipt back. The total, with a 25% gratuity, added more than $600 to her pocket. She slipped the receipt into the folio and placed it back on the podium. The irony was sharp: the man who had branded her worthless had left nothing, yet the sycophants he surrounded himself with now scrambled to cover both the cost and her dignity. Martin Delgado approached, his tone syrupy and false. "Emily, that was extraordinary. Truly, you represented the restaurant with grace. I only sided with Mr. Hale to de-escalate, you understand. I've always valued you." Emily looked at him steadily, her expression unreadable. She said nothing. Her silence struck harder than any words could. Robert Stanton's voice cut the air again, sharper this time. "Is that so, Martin? Because from where I stood, it looked as though you threw her to the wolves. Perhaps your corporate superiors will enjoy hearing how you protect your staff." Martin paled visibly, his lips parting as if to object, but no sound came. The applause continued. Diners smiled at Emily now with something deeper than pity, respect. She was no longer an invisible figure carrying plates. She had become the story of the evening, a name people would whisper about long after the last glass of wine was poured. She stood still, letting the moment settle inside her. Pride coiled within, not arrogant but resolute. Tonight, she had reclaimed what had been stripped from her. Tonight, she had proven not only her worth, but her power. Later, as the restaurant emptied and the lights dimmed, Chloe found her by the back hallway. "You were brilliant," Chloe whispered, gripping her hands. "I've never seen anything like that." Emily managed a tired smile. "I didn't plan it. I just couldn't let him define me." Chloe nodded fiercely. "And you didn't. You defined yourself." Emily pulled the $1 from her pocket. She laid it flat on the counter, its edges now soft from the heat of her grip. For a moment, she studied it, the symbol of her humiliation, and now, strangely, of her defiance. She folded it once and slipped it into her bag. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent light. Yet to Emily, everything looked different. She was no longer the girl who entered the Aurelia that evening in search of survival. She had left a mark, undeniable and unforgettable. The night had ended with applause, but her journey was just beginning. 3 months later, the world looked entirely different from the 54th floor of a glass tower in Midtown. Emily Carter stood by the wide window of her new office, gazing down at the endless grid of Manhattan. The view stretched to the horizon, a glittering sprawl that once represented obstacles but now pulsed with possibility. Her navy suit was sharply tailored, chosen with her first paycheck at Stanton & Cole. Gone was the severe black uniform of Aurelia, a garment that had once made her invisible. Now she dressed in armor she had chosen herself. The office smelled of old books, fresh coffee, and the faint hum of a high-powered computer. On her desk lay a neat stack of legal briefs, alongside a highlighted copy of federal sentencing guidelines. For the past 48 hours, she had been buried in discovery documents for a complex insider trading case, tracing thousands of emails to find one hidden thread of deceit. She had found it, a cleverly disguised line in a buried email, that broke the case wide open. A firm knock sounded at her door. Robert Stanton stepped in, holding the memo she had submitted that morning. His eyes, usually hard with authority, carried something else now, pride. "Miss Carter," he said, tapping the pages. "This is not the work of an intern. This is the work of a third-year associate. Your attention to detail is remarkable. You didn't just find the evidence, you built an unshakable narrative around it." Emily's cheeks warmed, but it was pride, not embarrassment. "Thank you, sir. The patterns were there. I just had to dig." Stanton waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be modest. You have a gift for seeing what others miss. It's the same instinct I saw in you that night at the Aurelia. You read the law in his insult. You turned weakness into strength. That instinct is rare." Emily inclined her head. "I'm just grateful for the opportunity." Stanton's voice softened. "The opportunity was always yours, Emily. You earned it long before I stepped in." When he left, she leaned back in her chair, her chest swelling with a quiet joy. The imposter syndrome that had haunted her first weeks at the firm had receded. She belonged here. Her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with her mother's face. Emily answered, and her mother's voice burst through, bright with joy. "Liv, honey, I have wonderful news. We just left Dr. Evans's office. Ethan's lung function is up by 15%. He's breathing easier. He ran across the park yesterday." "Ran, Emily." Tears blurred Emily's vision. "That's the best news I've ever heard." "It's because of you," her mother said, her voice breaking. "You gave him this chance. You saved him." Emily pressed a hand over her eyes, smiling through tears. "We all did, Mom. We're a team." When the call ended, she swiveled back toward the city. The skyscrapers gleamed in the setting sun, painted in orange and violet. What had once felt suffocating now looked like promise. A knock on the door startled her. Chloe Nguyen entered, balancing a grease-stained paper bag. Special delivery for the legal eagle, she teased. Pad Thai and gossip. Emily laughed. You're a lifesaver. Chloe plopped down and unpacked the food. I still can't get used to this. You, with an office and assistants. You used to hide from Martin in the broom closet. Emily grinned. And you always brought me stolen bread rolls. Chloe's expression turned mischievous. Oh, speaking of Martin, you won't believe what happened. Last week he comped an entire meal for tourists because he overheard one of them was pre-law. The staff calls it a code Carter. You're a legend, Liv. Emily chuckled, shaking her head. That's ridiculous. No, Chloe insisted. Other waitresses from different restaurants come in asking if your story's true. You're like a folk hero. Emily leaned back, humbled. If it gives them courage, then it's worth it. Chloe slid her phone across the desk. On the screen, an article from the Wall Street Journal blared its headline, Blackwood Capital faces hostile takeover amid founder's reputational crisis. Emily scanned the piece. Investors were abandoning Victor Hale after a string of public scandals. His arrogance, once tolerated, had become poison. Analysts called his reputation a liability. Chloe's eyes gleamed. He got what he deserved. Emily set the phone down gently. It's not karma, she murmured. It's a market correction. He built his empire on perception, but he never understood its true source, character. She turned back to the window. The city stretched before her, endless and alive. For the first time in years, she felt free. The dollar bill she had once kept as a scar was now tucked in her desk drawer, not as a wound but as a reminder. Her worth had never been for sale. The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across Manhattan, painting the skyscrapers in fire and shadow. From her office window on the 54th floor, Emily Carter felt the city no longer as a burden, but as a canvas of possibility. Her desk was scattered with files from a high-stakes case, but her focus drifted. In the drawer beside her rested the crisp $1 bill, folded and worn at the edges. She touched it sometimes, not in bitterness, but in remembrance. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was proof, of what she had endured, and how she had risen. Her phone buzzed with another message from her mother. Ethan had finished a morning run around the park without gasping for air. His laughter had carried across the grass, stronger and freer than she had ever heard. The new medication was working, and their lives, once shadowed by fear, were turning toward the light. Emily leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought of the night at the Aurelia, the sting of Victor Hale's words, the suffocating silence of the room, the crushing despair in the break room. She remembered how close she had come to believing him. Worthless. One word had nearly unraveled years of sacrifice and struggle. But that same night had also revealed the truth. Her voice, her courage, her knowledge, they had weight. They had power. And when she used them, the world had listened. The applause of strangers. The respect of Robert Stanton. The chance to step into a future she had dreamed of but never dared to expect. All of it had begun with one terrible insult, and her decision not to accept it. She rose from her chair and walked to the window. The city stretched beneath her, vibrant and restless. Cars crawled like veins of light, people hurried along sidewalks, stories unfolding in every direction. Somewhere out there, someone else was swallowing humiliation, wondering if their worth would ever be seen. Emily pressed her palm lightly against the glass. Her reflection looked back at her, not the invisible waitress, but the advocate she had become. She understood now that true value was not something anyone else could hand you or take away. It was not measured in money or status or in the careless words of the powerful. True value lived in resilience, in integrity, in the refusal to bend when the world tried to break you. Victor Hale had tried to purchase her dignity with $1. But dignity was never for sale. Emily turned back to her desk, her eyes falling on the stack of briefs waiting for her attention. The work was demanding, the hours long, but she welcomed it with open hands. Every page she read, every argument she built, was another step toward a future she had carved herself. The city outside pulsed with noise, but in her office there was a steady quiet, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Emily Carter was no longer a girl fighting to be seen. She was a lawyer in the making, a sister, a daughter, and a woman who had stood her ground against power and walked away stronger. She slid the $1 bill back into the drawer, closed it gently, and whispered to herself, almost as a vow. Never again. Then she sat down, opened a file, and began to write, her pen moving with the confidence of someone who knew her worth was unshakable. The skyline glowed brighter as the evening came on. The city was alive, and so was she. Her story, once marked by humiliation, had transformed into triumph. And the future stretched before her like the lights of Manhattan at dusk, endless, radiant, and hers to claim. This story reminds us that true worth is never determined by money, status, or the careless words of others. Dignity, courage, and integrity are priceless values that no one can strip away. Even in the face of humiliation, standing firm in your principles can turn despair into strength and transform the course of your life. This is a fictional work, written to feel realistic so that the lesson within can be absorbed and reflected upon. Any resemblance to actual people, places, or events is purely coincidental. Thank you so much for watching and supporting our stories. If this tale inspired or moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment, give the video a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story of resilience, justice, and hope.